It was a chilly November afternoon in the small town of Willow Creek. The air had a crisp bite to it, and the morning fog still clung to the windows, refusing to let go until midday. Mia had just finished school and was eager to get home. The house felt unusually quiet without her mom, Sarah, around. Her mom had taken a job at a nearby bakery after her husband, Daniel, passed away a few months earlier. It was still hard for Mia to get used to the silence, the emptiness that lingered in their home, but she tried to make the best of it. At least she wasn't completely alone. She had Max, the golden retriever who had been her constant companion for years. As Mia walked through the front door, she kicked off her muddy boots by the kitchen door and headed straight for the microwave to heat up some leftovers. She was tired from a long day at school and couldn't wait to sink into the couch with a plate of meatloaf. Everything seemed normal until she heard a strange sound from upstairs. A loud thump echoed through the empty house, followed by a soft whining sound. Mia froze mid-step, her fork still in hand. She hadn't heard anything like that before. She looked around the quiet kitchen, but it felt wrong. It was too still. With her heart beating faster than usual, she dropped her plate onto the counter and ran up the stairs, calling out, "Max, are you okay?" But there was no response, just more thumping from above. Mia hurried up the stairs, her hand gripping the railing, her mind racing with worries. What if something had happened to Max? Maybe he had gotten into something he shouldn't have. She reached the hallway at the top of the stairs and followed the sound to the old full-length mirror that had been hanging on the wall for as long as she could remember. It had a dark wooden frame, passed down from her grandmother's side of the family. It was one of those old-fashioned mirrors, the kind that could make a room feel bigger than it really was. There, sitting in front of the mirror, was Max. His golden coat gleamed in the dim light, and his tail was swishing nervously. But what was more unusual was what he was doing. One of his front paws was raised against the mirror, pressing gently as though he were trying to reach something on the other side. His eyes were fixed on the glass, and he was whining softly, like he was waiting for something to happen. Mia frowned. "Max, what's wrong, buddy?" she called softly, walking closer. Max didn't even look at her. His focus remained entirely on the mirror. Mia bent down to his level, her voice laced with confusion. "Hey, is there another dog in there or something?" She laughed nervously. Max had seen his reflection plenty of times before. He knew what he looked like. It wasn't like him to act so strange around a mirror. But even as she spoke, she noticed that Max wasn't just staring at his own reflection. For a brief moment, she thought she saw something else in the mirror, a flicker, like a shadow that didn't belong. It was so fast that Mia wasn't sure if she had imagined it, but the sensation was chilling. She took a step back, feeling uneasy. "Mom," Mia said, her voice shaking a little as she called downstairs. "There's a man in the mirror." Her words came out almost as a joke, but the unease in her stomach told her she wasn't joking. She hadn't seen anything clearly, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Downstairs, her mom was busy preparing dough for the bakery, and she didn't look up when Mia called her. "You've been watching too many horror movies," Sarah said with a laugh, brushing flour off her apron. "It's just your reflection, Mia." But Mia didn't think so. She knew Max better than anyone, and she could tell something was off. Max wasn't acting like himself, and the feeling in her gut told her there was more to this mirror than met the eye. The next few days were unsettling. Every afternoon after school, Maya would come home to find Max sitting by the mirror, staring at it with intense focus, his paw pressed up against the glass. Sometimes he would whine softly. Sometimes he would just sit there, still as a statue. Mia tried to ignore it at first, but it was impossible. Max wasn't just grieving the loss of Daniel. There was something else happening. Something strange. Something she couldn't explain. One afternoon, Mia stood at the bottom of the stairs, watching Max from across the room. He was sitting in front of the mirror again, his tail swishing restlessly. Mia tried to call him, but he didn't respond. She called again, louder this time, But it was as if Max couldn't hear her at all. It was like he was trapped in the mirror, waiting for something to happen or someone to show up. That was the moment she decided to take action. She needed answers. She had to find out why Max kept pawing at the mirror and what was behind it. She couldn't keep ignoring it any longer. This wasn't just about a grieving dog. It was about something deeper, something mysterious. That weekend, Mia convinced her mom to take the mirror down. "Maybe there's something behind it," Mia suggested, her voice filled with urgency. Sarah agreed, albeit reluctantly, and together they carefully unscrewed the mirror from the wall. But what they found behind it was more than they could have ever expected. The mirror came off easily, almost too easily. Instead of plain drywall, there was a hidden wooden panel behind it, covered in layers of paint. "Is this a door?" Mia asked, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. Sarah looked at the panel, unsure of what to make of it. "I don't know," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Max, who had been silent up until now, suddenly started pawing at the newly exposed panel. "Do we open it?" Mia asked, looking at her mom. The answer was clear. They had to. What they discovered next would change everything. This first segment introduces the mystery, builds suspense, and sets the tone for the rest of the story. The strange behavior of Max, the unexpected discovery behind the mirror, and the eerie sensation Maya feels create an intriguing beginning that will captivate the viewer and keep them invested in what's to come. Mia stood in the hallway, staring at the wooden panel that had been hidden behind the mirror for who knows how long. The strange sensation in her chest grew stronger, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something important, something forgotten, had been uncovered. Max was sitting by the panel now, his tail wagging slowly, as if waiting for them to do something. "Are we really going to open it?" Maya asked, her voice tinged with both excitement and fear. Her eyes were locked on the panel, which looked so ordinary, but now felt like the key to something much bigger. Sarah hesitated for a moment. The house had been Daniel's, passed down through the family, but this wasn't a part of the house she remembered. The panel wasn't there when they moved in, and it certainly hadn't been part of the original design. Yet there it was, old, weathered, and completely out of place. Sarah knew she should have been cautious, but the pull to discover what was hidden was too strong. "I guess we should," Sarah said, her voice unsteady but determined. "If it's something important, we'll figure it out. But if it's just junk, well, we'll deal with it." With that, Sarah grabbed a crowbar from the shed, and Mia held Max by the collar, keeping him calm. Mia's heart pounded in her chest as her mom pried at the edge of the wooden panel. It creaked and groaned, as though protesting the intrusion. But eventually, with one final tug, the panel gave way, revealing a shallow cavity in the wall. It was barely a foot deep, but wide enough to hold something. Max barked once, as if urging them to go on, and Mia took a step forward, her hand shaking as she reached for whatever was hidden inside. Her fingers brushed against something solid and cool. It was a small, metal box, tarnished and covered in a thin layer of dust. Mia pulled it out carefully, the weight of it surprising her. She placed it gently on the floor and wiped off the dust. "What do you think it is?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but it looks old," Sarah replied, her eyes wide with curiosity. She knelt beside Mia and slowly lifted the lid of the box. The hinges creaked, and the faint smell of old wood and paper filled the air. Inside the box, there were several objects, old photographs, letters that were starting to fade, a small knitted cap, and a tarnished metal object that looked like a locket. Mia picked up the first photograph and turned it over. The faces in the photo were unfamiliar, but the woman in the center had a gentle smile, and the man beside her had a serious expression. The back of the photo was written in faded ink, "Raymond and June, 1947. Raymond? Mia's heart skipped a beat. Her father's name was Raymond, but he'd always kept his past a mystery. She'd never heard of a June before. Was this some long-forgotten part of her father's life? A part he never talked about? Mia passed the photo to Sarah, who stared at it for a long time, her eyes narrowing. "I don't know who these people are," Sarah said softly. "But this doesn't look like something your dad would have kept to himself." Mia gently placed the photo back in the box and picked up one of the letters. The paper was fragile, almost disintegrating under her fingers. It was addressed to Raymond Ellis from June. The ink was smudged in some places, but Mia could still make out the words. "If you ever return, tell your son the truth," the letter began. "He deserves to know where he came from." Mia read it aloud, her voice trembling with every word. Her mother, meanwhile, sat frozen, the color draining from her face as the weight of the letter settled in. "What truth?" Sarah whispered, almost to herself. Mia's mind raced. Who was June? And what was this truth? Why had Daniel never mentioned her? What could this letter mean for their family? As Mia continued to go through the box, she found more letters, each one from June, and each one filled with sorrow and longing. The letters spoke of a child, someone Mia had never heard of, someone named Lillian. The letters hinted at a secret, a painful one, but no matter how much Mia read, they never fully explained what had happened. Max, who had been silent until now, suddenly stood up and began pawing at the floor again, his nose pressed to the spot where the box had been. He barked once, and then looked up at Mia, as if urging her to continue. Mia laughed nervously, unsure of what to make of Max's strange behavior. "What is it, boy?" she asked. Sarah reached for another letter, this one written in a more hurried hand. "Lillian died," she read aloud. "I never told Raymond the truth. I never told him about her. It was a secret, but it can't stay that way forever." Mia's breath caught in her throat. What was this secret? Why had her father kept it hidden? And why had Max been so determined to lead them to this moment? "That's it," Mia said, standing up and looking at her mom with wide eyes. "We need to know more. We can't leave this secret buried any longer." The air in the house had changed. It was no longer just a house filled with memories of a loved one who had passed. Now it felt like a house full of mysteries, mysteries that had been waiting for the right moment to be uncovered. Max's actions, his odd behavior around the mirror, all made sense now. He had led them here, to the heart of the mystery, to the truth that had been hidden for so many years. Sarah stood up slowly, still processing everything that was unfolding. "I think you're right," she said. "We need to find out more about June and Lillian, and we need to talk to your uncle." Mia felt a surge of determination. The answers were here, in this box, in these letters, and Max had been the key to unlocking them. But the journey wasn't over yet. There were more pieces to this puzzle, and Mia knew they would have to keep looking, keep searching, until they uncovered everything. With the box in hand, Mia and Sarah set out to uncover the truth about June, Lillian, and the secret that had been hidden in their family for decades. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Max had led them to something much bigger than they had ever imagined. And they weren't going to stop until they knew the whole story. Mia couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled upon something far greater than they had anticipated. The box, the letters, the photographs, and Max's strange behavior, everything seemed to be connected, but the truth still felt just out of reach. She couldn't help but feel as though the answers were hidden in the past, buried beneath layers of time, family secrets, and unspoken words. She needed to understand why her father had never shared this part of his life with her, and what had happened to June and Lillian. After finding the box, Mia and Sarah spent hours in the living room, poring over the letters, trying to piece together what had been left unsaid for so long. Max sat quietly beside them, his eyes never leaving the box. It was as though he understood that they were on the brink of discovering something important, something that had been locked away for far too long. Sarah, her hands trembling as she sorted through the papers, looked up at Mia. "I don't know what to think anymore," Sarah said, her voice filled with a mix of confusion and disbelief. This is your father's past, Mia. He never spoke about June or Lillian. He never mentioned them at all. Why would he keep it all a secret? Mia didn't have an answer. She couldn't understand why Daniel had hidden this part of his life from them, but she knew they had to find out more. The answers were somewhere in the letters, somewhere in the past that had been forgotten. They just had to keep digging. That evening, Sarah made a decision. "We need to talk to Uncle Sam," she said. "He might know something about this. If anyone in the family knows, it's him." Mia's heart skipped a beat at the mention of her uncle. Uncle Sam had been estranged from the family for years. He lived in another town, and they hadn't heard from him in a long time. Sarah had always been close to him, but something had happened in the past, something that had caused a rift in their relationship. Despite that, Mia knew her mother was right. If anyone could shed light on this mystery, it was Uncle Sam. The next day, Sarah picked up the phone and dialed the number. The conversation was brief, but it was enough to confirm that Uncle Sam would be coming over that weekend. Mia couldn't wait to see him. She had never met him face to face, but she had heard stories about him from her mother. Stories of a man who was kind and warm, but also a little distant. He had always been a part of their family, but in a way, he had remained on the outskirts, much like the mystery surrounding June and Lillian. When Uncle Sam arrived, Mia was surprised by how much he resembled her father, Daniel. He had the same dark eyes, the same strong jawline, and the same quiet demeanor. But there was something different about him. A sadness, perhaps, or maybe just the weight of years gone by. He greeted Sarah with a hug, but there was a noticeable distance in his eyes. "It's been a long time," he said, his voice soft but heavy with meaning. Sarah smiled warmly, but Mia could tell that there was an unspoken tension between them. It wasn't just the years that had passed. It was something deeper, something unresolved. Mia tried to ignore the awkwardness, focusing instead on the task at hand. "Uncle Sam, we found something," Sarah said, her voice steady but anxious. She opened the box and began to lay out the photographs, letters, and other items in front of him. Uncle Sam's eyes widened as he took in the contents of the box. "I knew this day would come," he said quietly, his voice distant. "I just didn't know it would be like this." Mia looked up at her uncle, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" Uncle Sam took a deep breath and looked at Sarah. "You never asked. None of you ever asked. And maybe that was a good thing, but I think it's time you knew the truth." Sarah's face grew pale. "What truth?" Uncle Sam glanced at Mia, his eyes softening. "June was your father's sister," he said softly, "but not the kind of sister you think." Mia's mind spun with confusion. She had always known about her father's family, but she had never heard of June. And if June was really Daniel's sister, why had her existence been kept a secret? "She wasn't his biological sister," Uncle Sam continued, his voice heavy with emotion. "She was adopted into the family when she was young, after her parents died in an accident. She was a troubled soul, but she was always close to Raymond, your grandfather. Your father loved her like a sister, but she had a past, one that she never wanted anyone to know about." Mia's head spun. What kind of past? Uncle Sam hesitated, clearly struggling with the words. "She had a child, a baby girl, named Lillian, but Lillian didn't survive. There was a miscarriage, and June was devastated. Your father was there for her, but June never fully recovered. She went away after that. She disappeared for years, and no one really knew what happened to her." Mia's heart ached for June, for the pain she must have endured. But why had Daniel never spoken of her? Why had he kept her a secret from the family? Why didn't Dad ever tell us about this? Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Uncle Sam looked down, his hands trembling as he picked up one of the old photographs. "Because he promised her," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "He promised June that he would never tell anyone. He didn't want the family to know about Lillian. He thought it would tear everyone apart." Mia's eyes welled with tears as she looked at her mother. Sarah's face was ashen, her hands shaking. The truth was more painful than she could have ever imagined. Daniel had kept this secret to protect the family, but in doing so, he had left a part of himself and his past buried. That's why he never talked about June, Uncle Sam said, his voice breaking. Because he loved her. And he loved you, Mia, and he didn't want to hurt you. Mia nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the truth settle over her like a heavy blanket. She didn't know what to say, but she understood now. Her father had kept the past hidden, thinking it was for the best. But in the end, it was Max, the loyal dog, who had uncovered the truth, leading them to something they had never expected. The mystery of June, Lillian, and the family secrets had just begun to unravel, but Mia knew one thing for sure. She would not stop until she had uncovered every part of the story. The days after their conversation with Uncle Sam felt like they were trapped in a whirlwind. The truth about June and Lillian had turned their world upside down, but Mia couldn't stop thinking about what Uncle Sam had said. Her father had kept this secret from them all these years, not because he didn't love them, but because he believed it was for their protection. But now that the truth was out, Mia couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, something deeper that was still waiting to be uncovered. Mia found herself walking through the house more slowly than usual, as if the walls themselves had stories to tell, stories that had been hidden away for decades. Max, ever faithful, was always close by her side, his golden coat now looking a little faded, but his presence as strong as ever. He had been the catalyst for their journey into the past, and Mia couldn't help but wonder if there was still something he wanted them to find. One afternoon, Mia sat down in the living room with the box and all its contents spread out in front of her. Her mom, Sarah, had been quiet ever since Uncle Sam's visit, but Mia could tell she was wrestling with her own emotions. The family's past had been laid bare, and the weight of it was heavy on both of them. It felt like the house itself had absorbed the grief and secrets of generations, and now they had to find a way to move forward. Max jumped up onto the couch beside her, resting his head on Mia's lap. She absent-mindedly stroked his fur as she gazed at the photographs and letters in front of her. She had been staring at the same images for days, trying to make sense of the past. The letters from June were filled with sorrow, regret, and love, but they still didn't answer all the questions that burned in Mia's mind. How had June's life intersected with her father's so deeply? Why hadn't her father ever told them about her? The more Mia thought about it, the more she realized that June wasn't the only one with a hidden past. Her father, Daniel, had never fully shared his story either. There were gaps in his life, moments he had chosen to keep locked away, just as June had kept her pain hidden. But now, with the letters from June and the photographs of Lillian, Mia felt like they were uncovering the pieces of a larger puzzle, one that was intertwined with their own family's history. Max, sensing her confusion, let out a soft whine, pulling Mia from her thoughts. She glanced down at him and smiled. It was almost as if he understood the gravity of everything they had uncovered. He had been there every step of the way, guiding them through the mystery. But now, Mia felt like they had reached a crossroads. The story of June and Lillian was part of her family's past, but what about their future? The next morning, Sarah came downstairs with a determined look on her face. She had been quiet for so long, but Mia could tell that her mom was ready to take the next step. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, sitting down beside Mia. "We need to visit Lillian's grave. We need to honor her memory." Mia's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't even thought about going to the grave. The letters had made everything so real, but the thought of standing at Lillian's resting place made it all the more tangible. "You're right," Maya said quietly. "We need to do that. We need to put the past to rest." The decision was made. That weekend, they would visit Lillian's grave. But as the days passed and the weekend drew nearer, Mia began to feel a strange sense of anticipation. She wasn't sure what she was expecting to find at the grave, but she felt like something important was waiting for them there. The drive to the cemetery was quiet. Max was sitting in the back seat, his head resting on Mia's lap, as though he knew exactly what was about to happen. The road to the cemetery wound through tall trees and rolling hills, and Mia couldn't help but feel that they were heading into a place where time itself had slowed down. The cemetery was small, tucked away in the woods at the edge of town. It had always been there, but Mia had never given it much thought. Now, it felt like a place of reckoning. When they arrived, Maya was struck by how peaceful the cemetery was. It was a place of quiet, of reflection, and of remembrance. The graves were old, some worn down by time, but each one held a story that had been left untold for so long. Mia could feel the weight of history pressing down on her, and she couldn't help but think that this was where it all began. This was where the answers would be found. Max led the way as they walked through the rows of headstones. He was calm now, his steps deliberate, as though he had been here before. Sarah and Mia followed, their eyes scanning the graves for any sign of Lillian's resting place. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they found it. A small, simple stone marked the spot, with only the name Lillian Ellis engraved on it. There was no birth date, no death date, just her name. Mia knelt down in front of the grave, her fingers brushing the cool stone. The weight of it hit her then, the weight of everything they had uncovered. She looked at Sarah, who was standing beside her, her eyes filled with tears. "This is it," Sarah said softly. "This is where it all started." Mia nodded, her throat tight. She couldn't explain why, but she felt an overwhelming sense of peace as she sat there, staring at the gravestone. It was as if Lillian had been waiting for them to find her, to remember her, to honor her memory. Max sat beside them, his tail wagging gently, as if he understood the significance of the moment. Mia placed a flower on the grave, a simple daisy, just like the ones that had appeared throughout their search. It felt like the right gesture, the right way to say goodbye. But as she stood up, she realized that this wasn't really goodbye. It was a beginning of understanding, of connection, and of healing. As they left the cemetery, Maya felt a sense of closure, but also a sense of anticipation. The past had been uncovered, the secrets revealed, but there was still more to learn. There was still more to discover. Max had shown them the way, and now it was up to them to continue the journey. And as they drove back home, Mia glanced down at Max, who was resting peacefully at her feet. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered. Max gave a soft bark, as if to say, "I always knew."